schemes targeted some of the most vulnerable citizens in our community, our senior citizens and our elders. The massive conspiracy described in the indictments represent the single largest conspiracy charged in the District of Minnesota. It is also the first time that we have charged a case under the Senior Citizens Against Marketing Scams Act in this district. The Scams Act specifically aims to protect senior citizens from marketing scams just like the one charged in these indictments. For far too long, the defendants allegedly operated a mass fraudulent scheme from call centers across the United States and Canada. The indictments allege that the defendants used one of two general approaches to perpetrate their scheme. They used fraudulent scripts that were either a renewal script or a cancellation script. The renewal script is a script that they used to go to senior citizens and say, for example, you have an existing subscription. Let me tell you, I can reduce that. I'll reduce it from $49.90 to $39.90 per month. The senior citizen would then agree, but in all reality, what was happening is they were signing up for yet another magazine subscription that they did not want to, and they were tricked into doing that. The second script was known as a cancellation script, and that was used specifically for people who had already been fraudulently induced into this sales scam. This script took advantage of the victim's desperation to get out of the debt from these fraudulent magazine subscriptions. The defendants allegedly used this script to present a false claim that what they would do is cancel their subscriptions in exchange for a one-time lump sum payment. In reality, all the defendants were doing was taking that money. Their subscriptions were not canceled. The criminal conspiracy involved a network of defendants who all held a different role in the conspiracy. These include the scheme leaders, the company owners, the call center managers, telemarketers, and lead brokers. And I'd like to take just a minute to tell you about each of these individual roles. The scheme leaders provide an array of services to companies involved in this fraudulent scam, including software programs. They tracked orders, sales, and their customer information for companies involved in this fraudulent magazine scheme. The scheme leaders also provided leads to the company owners and sent out confirmation letters, invoices, bills, and collection letters to victims who had been defrauded by this fraudulent magazine scheme. The company owners operated telemarketing call centers and provided lead lists and fraudulent sales scripts to their telemarketing employees. These companies were operating in 14 states across the country, as demonstrated by the map to my left. Next are the call center managers. The call center managers train the telemarketers to use these fraudulent scripts to defraud the victims. Through the call centers, victims were lied to, deliberately confused, and or threatened. The indictments also charged the lead brokers who bought and sold lead lists of victims. Many of the consumers on these lists were elderly and susceptible to fraudulent and deceptive sales tactics, and particularly valuable to companies because they knew they were an easy target. Accordingly, the lead lists commanded a significant premium and sold for as much as $10 to $15 per name. Some victims were billed by more than 10 magazine companies a month to a total of $1,000 per month for magazine subscriptions. Again, these are senior citizens, elders, folks on fixed incomes. In total, these cases account for more than $300 million in losses. In total, there are, at a minimum, 150,000 victims located in all 50 states. I want to emphasize those numbers again because they are staggering. This case accounts for at least $300 million in losses to at least 150,000 victims across the United States. This was a widespread, well thought out, long-running fraud that we have now dismantled on a systemic level. The Department of Justice is committed to protecting our senior citizens, our elders, from fraud, from exploitation, and from abuse. For far too long, some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, in our families, have fallen prey to these types of mass telemarketing scams. Many of you might have fallen victim, or one of your loved ones might have done so. Crimes against older Americans have dramatically increased within the last years, and we know and we expect that that will continue as our population ages. The emotional, financial, and physical toll of these crimes is absolutely heartbreaking. The United States Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota is committed to protecting our nation's seniors from these types of scams, and combating elder justice is a key priority for the Department of Justice. This past year alone, the Department of Justice collectively charged 400 defendants globally for crimes committed against the elderly, which is a 54% increase, with an estimate of $1 billion in losses. So I want to be clear here. First, there are likely other fraudulent telemarketing scams out there operating right now. And I want to speak directly to the individuals involved in those scams, and let me be clear. When you pick up that phone and you try to contact a senior citizen from one of these lead lists, you may unwittingly not realize you're contacting a federal agent acting in an undercover capacity as a susceptible senior citizen. Be warned. Second, if this scheme sounds familiar to you because either you or a loved one, maybe a mother, a father, a grandparent, or another vulnerable loved one, has fallen victim, we want to hear from you, please. We have set up an email address and a website where you can go for more information. It's really important that I explain this part. These calls aren't just annoying. And I think all of us in this room right now would agree that we have received many telemarketing scam calls that we simply hang up on. These calls are more than just annoying. Beyond financial, they take an emotional toll, especially on these victims. And we know these calls are threatening because we've heard about them in our investigation. And you should hear what it sounds like too. Here's one example, which we included in the search warrant that is a part of the public record. And I'll set up what happened here. There is a woman who is an elderly citizen who was a victim of this fraudulent magazine subscription scam. She received a call from a person purporting to be an attorney. She hung up on that individual. That individual called back and left a message, and I'm going to read this verbatim to you as contained in the search warrant because the words are very important. This woman's name was Betty, and this is the message that the purported lawyer left for her. Yeah, Betty, it's not smart hanging up on attorneys who have your credit score right in front of them. So that's not a problem. If you don't want to make a payment or settle this, we're going to pursue with legal action for the full $1,100 value of your account. And in the meantime, this contract will renew for for another 3-year terms. So you're going to receive magazines probably until the day you die. I hope that's what you want. Have a great day. Over the past 7 years, 32 magazine companies billed Betty more than $58,000 for magazine subscriptions. Betty is just one of the many, what we call mega victims, who got defrauded over and over again by these companies. This could be any of us. This could be your mother, your father, your grandma, your grandpa. So again, please reach out. More information is available, again, to my left on the screen at www.fbi.gov/magazine victims or email magazinevictims@fbi.gov. This case is the result of a partnership among the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the United States Postal Inspection Services, the Treasury General for Tax Administration, and the Minnesota Attorney General's Office. I would like to invite 2 of my guests here today to speak. The first is the Special Agent in charge of the Minneapolis Field Office, Michael Paul. This second, I would like to speak to you, is Postal Inspector in charge, Ruth Mendonca, each of whom will say a few words about these cases.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Michael Paul. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI's Minneapolis Field Office, which serves Minnesota and North and South Dakota. This 21-month joint FBI and Postal Inspection Service investigation was expansive, exhaustive, thorough, and at times intense. The resulting numbers are staggering. $300 million pilfered from the bank accounts of mostly older Americans who fell victim to these aggressive telemarketing schemes. Beyond the financial loss, there is an equally staggering number, and you heard about it from the U.S. Attorney, 150,000 victims whose lives were changed forever and not for the better. We could fill our local professional football stadium here in Minneapolis with sellout crowds twice and still not accommodate all of these victims, 150,000 people. The numbers are so big that you can get lost in them, but I assure you there is a sad and very important story behind each very real person. And these are people that may be someone that sounds like someone you know, a loved one, a family member, or a personal friend. Like the retired farming couple now in their 80s who endured relentless calls from pushy swindlers and lost thousands of dollars. Or the diesel mechanic who paid $23,000 over 4 years, his checking account continually overdrawn. At one point, he was tricked into thinking he was saving money and reducing his recurring payments, but the con artists were actually just adding account and increasing the charges. All the victim could do was close his account, overdrawn, bringing him further financial turmoil and personal strife. Another victim lost $60,000. Over 40% of her account withdrawals were for phony magazine subscriptions. She retired in 2013 after 33 years of service to her community as a county tax assessor. Elder fraud takes many shapes and forms as criminals take advantage of this growing and vulnerable population. The FBI has prioritized our efforts to address elder fraud in close collaboration with our domestic and international law enforcement partners. Seniors are a particularly vulnerable victim group, and they're often specific targets of financial crimes because of their unique life situation and financial position. They could be financially stable, own their own homes, and carry little debt. Criminals often exploit these characteristics, wreaking havoc on elderly victims' lives, their financial, psychological, and physical well-being. As alleged in today's indictments, the fraudsters buy and trade lead lists that include the senior citizens' names, telephone numbers, and personal information, and as you heard, they repetitively prey on these victims. As evidenced in the case, the victims of these schemes often lose thousands of dollars or more, which can cause irreparable harm to critical resources that they need for their daily survival. While we can't undo the terrible victimization in this case, we hope that by publicizing the size and the scope of the investigation, we can educate potential victims and their families, increasing their awareness of these criminal fraud schemes. This case is by no means over. We're still identifying additional victims every day. If you believe you're the victim of fraud, or you know a senior who may be, regardless of financial loss, immediately report that incident to the FBI office locally or to a local law enforcement agency. You can send us an email at the previously mentioned email address magazinevictims@fbi.gov, or go to the FBI's website, fbi.gov/magazine victims, to get in touch with us. In closing, we hope that potential fraudsters are also listening carefully today. If you knock on a door, send an email, or make a phone call with the intent to prey on an elderly victim, remember that it may well be an FBI agent or a postal inspector on the other end, and will soon be walking and knocking on your door. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ruth Mendonça, and I am the inspector in charge of the Denver Division of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. And from Denver, I have the privilege of overseeing multiple operational teams here in Minnesota. I am proud to join U.S. Attorney Erica McDonald and FBI Special Agent in charge, Michael Paul, in announcing the largest single indictment in the history of the District of Minnesota. More importantly, an indictment that sends a message to Minnesota and across the United States that we will not tolerate telemarketing scams that defraud our elderly and vulnerable citizens. I want to use my time to talk about how this case started. 2 years ago, my office, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office joined forces to prosecute a single defendant who ran a fraudulent magazine company here in Minnesota. He defrauded 13,000 elderly and otherwise vulnerable victims out of more than $13 million. We felt good about that prosecution. It was important and sent a strong message that here in Minnesota, we will not tolerate the swindling of our seniors. The mission of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service is to enforce the laws that protect the nation's mail system. As law enforcement, our mission is to stop the crime and to punish the offenders, but also to make victims whole, to take their money from the bad guys and make restitution. In that first case, we sent out questionnaires to those 13,000 victims, asking about their losses, asking how the crime affected them. What we got back was staggering. We received letters crying out, saying, "I'm scared, help me," saying, "Wake up, law enforcement," saying, "This single defendant is a drop in the bucket." In the words of one elderly son's victims, there is an entire predatory magazine industry out there. So we got to work. For the last 2 years, postal inspectors, FBI special agents, and assistant United States attorneys bore down with the goal of dismantling and disrupting the entire predatory magazine industry. The fruits of that investigation is what you have before you today. Dozens of complaints around dozens of companies located across the United States, more than 150,000 victims, more than $300 million in fraud. It is, in a word, staggering. And this is just one of the fraudulent industries that preys on my parents, your parents, our vulnerable and elderly population. And I want to take a moment to speak to the children of elderly parents. We need your help to shut down the remainder of the predatory magazine industry and other fraudulent telemarketing scams out there targeting seniors. Look out for suspicious and bogus charges on your parents' credit card bills. And if you see your parents being defrauded, having their hard-earned savings stolen from them, reach out. Call law enforcement. Call us. Email us. Visit our website. Thank you.
We're committed to protecting our senior citizens and our elders from abuse, neglect, from financial exploitation. They took care of us. They raised us. Now it's time that we take care of them. We're going to open it up for questions, but there's 2 points that I want to make before I see what questions you might have of us. One is on the PowerPoint presentation that you see to your left. There's one bill that's on there, and the reason we put that up there is for folks to be able to look at that and understand how it would be reflected on a credit card bill. So if you are someone who is acting on behalf of a vulnerable loved one or an elderly loved one, know that that's how it's going to look. It's going to come up. And they're going to be small charges, $39.95, $49.95. It might be something that would go unnoticed. So take a look. Look with your family members. Make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect your loved ones. The second thing I want to emphasize is while we are here today, this started with cooperation that we had with our Minnesota Attorney General's office. And so I wanted to make sure to credit the Minnesota Attorney General's office. We have a strong working relationship between our office and their office. And although, you know, we have different tools, which is ultimately why it came to the U.S. Attorney's Office, because we have the national reach, we have the jurisdiction. I just want to make sure to acknowledge that cooperation and that partnership. And so with that, we'll open it up to any questions that you might have of us.
Yeah, hey, can you tell us anything about who was the masterminds of this whole operation?
At this point, I don't want to identify necessarily anybody as a mastermind, but as you'll see when you look in the indictments and the search warrants, you will see who the company, you'll see who the scheme leaders are, and you'll be able to deduce that. But I where to use that word given the posture that we're in at this time.
Got it.
Yes, ma'am.
Were these any physical magazines that ever arrived, and were they thematic in any way? Did the scammers, so-called scammers, target specific companies?
Tell me again, can I, it's so hard with the mask, but.
It's okay. So my first question was, were these physical magazines that ever arrived, and was there a subject matter that they targeted specifically for the magazines?
No, there was no subject matter specifically targeted. I will tell you that the vast majority of these, they were just false and fraudulent, that magazines never arrived.
Erica, just about the, I'm sorry.
No, you go first, Brent.
With the victims, is there any redress for these? Is there any civil action that can be taken to help these people get their money back?
That's a really great question, and I'll tell you what we're working hard on is restitution in this case. The team has been working very hard to identify every bit of resource they can to get that resource, take it in, and be able to give restitution to those victims in the criminal case. With respect to a civil case, they'll have to consult an attorney and see if there's something they can do. But, you know, sometimes I've referred to this case as, you know, my team over here tells me it's a fraud that, you know, ran an inch deep, mile wide. And what that means is, as opposed to, you know, a big fraud against a lot of big people with a lot of money, it's little frauds against a bunch of people, 150,000. And so what that means is, I call it a criminal class action, something capable of repetition but evading review because it's such a small amount. And so they would have to consult an attorney, but I would tell you we're doing everything we can to get restitution for these victims.
It's interesting to talk about that it happened to our parents, that my mom actually had this happen to her. And she had given an amount to help for their computer. And they said that they accidentally put in, I think, $25,000. It was supposed to be $250, and it was $25,000. And so she was driving around in the rain, trying to find a Western Union to mail a check for $25,000. And I talked to her on the phone. I'm like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, I can't find." I'm like, "Mom, stop!"
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So I think I kind of want to get at that. You know, she's almost 90, and she is of the, you know, the generation that
That's right.
if they're trusting,
Yes.
and she was so desperate to help that poor person who made a mistake and was going to lose his job, and so I kind of want to speak to that.
You're so right on that, and that's exactly what we've seen in this investigation is, you know, we refer to it as the greatest generation, right? People who are polite and true to their word, and a handshake is a handshake, and what you say means and matters, and I'm going to do the same on my part. And so that is the targeted population here, and that's what we're trying to get at is protecting those individuals who, because they gave their word, feel like that they owe it even though they were actually being tricked and defrauded. Thank you for raising that point.
Just a quick question about the all the folks who were indicted here. It sounds like that you separated them into like the scheme leaders and these different divisions. Did everybody have to be in on this in order to be indicted? I'm just wondering, you know, will the telemarketers, did they know? Were they a part of this scheme as well?
That's a great question, and the well answer to that is every individual who is in these three indictments, a grand jury found probable cause to believe a crime was committed and they committed the crime. And as you know, the United States Attorney's Office, when we prosecute a case, we look more than beyond probable cause. We hold ourselves to the standard. Can we prove it by proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Yeah.
Okay. I think I heard you say this is the biggest conspiracy case in Minnesota. I heard someone else say this was the biggest case in Minnesota, and it was phrased differently in the press release. I wonder if you could just put it in perspective, just clarify, like, this is the biggest X in Minnesota history, and does it rate nationally as one of the biggest fraud schemes?
This is the largest elder fraud case that we have prosecuted in the state of Minnesota, without a doubt. I would have to go back in history to see if maybe there was any drug indictment back in the day that had more than 60 defendants in a conspiracy. But I can tell you without a doubt, in recent history, it's the largest that we've prosecuted. Correct. Yes?
Can you talk again a little bit more about the Minnesota connection sort of being the core of this whole case?
Well, you know, as you see, there's 14 different states involved, right? And there's a multitude of victims all across the country. But Minnesota has rock star prosecutors who decided to take a case and make it into a big case. And so it could have been prosecuted in a number of places, but working in partnership with our other law enforcement partners across the country, my team ran with it once they had the lead on it.
And that lead again was the 2 years ago?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And
Yeah.
this, you may have already said this, as far as the number of the victims located in Minnesota, how did Minnesota victims fare on the scale of you know, across the country of victims? Were there a lot more here than other states?
I don't know the answer to that. I will get you the answer to that unless I look to my team and they tell me they have the immediate answer.
We do.
Okay. And I'm going to introduce you Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, Harry Jacobs, Melinda Williams. These are my three AUSAs that are assigned to the case, and I'm going to let Joe go ahead and address that.
Joe,
Oh,
will you
thanks a lot.
say and spell your first name?
It's Joe Thompson, Joethompson. Thank you. Ironically, there was actually fewer victims in Minnesota than in many states because of the state attorney general's office has such an active consumer protection program and enforcement actions. A lot of call centers and telemarketers have put Minnesota on a do not call list, and they try to avoid calling victims in Minnesota. And there's several states that are on that do not call list. Every company's is different. Minnesota's is typically on many of them. Sometimes Minnesota victims do get called, and we do have Minnesota victims here, including some of the mega victims whose credit cards look like the one up on the screen. But there's been fewer historically here because of the actions of the state attorney general and their consumer protection branch. But there are victims here, and obviously in all 50 states.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions?
You know, I've got two parents who are very much in the same situation. They called me last night because of this. What shows up on the phone when they're calling? What do seniors need to look out for? Is it just a generic phone number? Does it say a name, or how does it?
Any of the above. Any of the above. It's the content of the call that they need to pay attention to.
And should they just hang up?
Hang up. Hang up. Don't engage in further conversation. I mean, my mom, who's smart as a tack, sharp as a whip, I mean, I heard her giving out her Social Security number on a phone call one day, and I thought, that's my mom who, you know, I wouldn't mess with. So honestly, hang up. And if you believe, if any way you believe that your loved one has been defrauded or victimized, even if it's not just this scheme, still use these reporting. The FBI is listening. They'll pay attention. Postal is listening, pay attention. Our Attorney General is listening, will pay attention. If you believe that you or a loved one has been a victim of one of these mass marketing scams, please report it. Because with that, we can take down and stop the fraud from occurring. Yes, sir.
Of these fraudsters, do they get the list legally, or do these lists come from a purchase?
As you'll see in the paperwork that's available in the public record, is that there are lists that are shared among them. And the reason that they carry such a premium is because these are individuals on these lists, these lead lists, who are known to be susceptible to this type of fraud. You know, what you'll learn in generally the industry is there's all kinds of lead lists for sales, and names are on them. I'm probably on a lead list. You all are probably on a lead list as well. But from what I've learned is my name isn't going for $10 to $15 per hit. I'm probably like a dime or a nickel or a penny. These guys explained it to me in depth that the value of that name depends on how likely you are to be duped or defrauded. And so the fact that these were going for $10 to $15 per name tells you how valuable those lead lists were and who was on them.
And how did they figure that out?
How did they figure out?
Who's vulnerable? Yeah.
Over time in history and seeing what works and what doesn't work.
And they're still at it. I mean, this is great, the 300 million in this indictment, but it's not going to end it.
We are going to do everything we can to keep taking down the industry. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, well, I see no further show of hands. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Welcome. You guys ready?
I'm still working. I hate to say it that way, but, you know, broadcasting and advertising, we've lost a few.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Tasha.
I mean, that sucks. I'm sorry, yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna take off. Good to see you, Derek.
Yeah.
I'll get him. Stay right here. Are they going to do something?